Welcome everyone to the second webinar of our BoDCast series. It's really good to have us see you tonight. A key aim of the BoDCast is to bring big conversations to our community, and we're delighted to be joined this evening by colleagues in the Charedi community who are going to share an insight into their community, one that is much spoken about, though not often by voices from within. The Board of Deputies works with partners in Charedi communities on a number of issues that affect the community, such as religious freedoms, welfare, and education. We were recently also absolutely delighted to welcome Shmuel Yosef Davidsohn, our new deputy from South Tottenham Synagogue. With this in mind, we wanted to provide an opportunity for the wider Jewish community to hear from leaders in the Charedi community for themselves in order to create a dialogue and more mutual understanding. Whilst there are likely to be differences between communities and how they perceive the world around them, we hope to show that it is not all black and white wherever we are. I would now like to hand over to our Chief Executive, Gillian Merron, and I really believe that we are in for a really fascinating evening. Gillian will now introduce our speakers and chair the panel. Thank you, Gillian.
Thank you very much to our President, Marie van der Zyl, for that warm introduction. And the whole point of this evening, and I want to welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. The whole point of this evening is that the Charedi community, as we all know, is often depicted as a monolithic group. Well, that's something that we want to unpick tonight, and we're going to unpick it with the assistance of 4 members of the Charedi community who will be offering a real insight to us and an opportunity to expand our knowledge, understanding and appreciation. So by way of brief introduction, and I want to thank them all very much for being here, we are joined by Eli Spitzer, and Eli is the head teacher of a Charedi school that recently received a good Ofsted grade and is also a blogger. Shmuel Yosef Davidsohn is our second member of the panel. Shmuel Yosef founded the Charedi Youth Organisation and recently became deputy for South Tottenham Synagogue. Our third panellist is Michelle Ciffer, who chairs the Orthodox Jewish Forum in Manchester and manages a children and family centre. And last and absolutely not least, Rabbi Avi Lazarus, my chief executive colleague from the Federation of Synagogues, and you are all extremely welcome this evening. So to give those who are watching and listening an idea of how we're going to run this evening, our panelists will each make brief opening remarks, so to kind of set their scene, and then I will pose some follow-up questions to each of them specific to something that they've raised with us or that I may know about them. And then I will take, by looking at the questions that you submit, I'll be submitting questions that the audience who are watching live on social media are submitting. So if you have comments and questions, please feel free to submit them throughout, and we will feature some of them during the webinar. So I'm delighted to pass to Eli Spitzer, and the screen is yours, Eli.
Thank you, Gillian, for that very kind introduction, and thank you to the Board of Deputies for having me. So I'm Eli Spitzer, as Gillian said, the head teacher of a Hasidic school in northwest London, in Hendon. I have lived in Stamford Hill all my life. I attended Stamford Hill Cheder and Yeshiva, and eventually went into headship, mainly because I am passionate about raising standards of education, especially secular education in the Charedi community. And especially the last few years, with the well-documented struggle with Ofsted and new regulation, I found myself increasingly motivated and exercised by two factors in the education scene of the Haredi community. First, there is the internal struggle to raise standards of education and to improve the way we approach education and attitudes from parents and school leaders. And on the other hand, it is to defend and resist various attempts by outside agencies and bodies, whether at a policy level in government or from the sort of secular lobbyists who what I believe is what they are trying to do is to undermine the legitimacy of Haredi values as opposed to genuinely attempting to raise standards of education. So to that end, I am obviously a head teacher and doing it on the front line, but I've also just under a year ago launched a blog where, again, I aim to do two things. First of all, have an internal discussion with my own community about various flaws and various areas for improvement, but it is also a very central element of it, and is also part of my periodical column in the Jewish Chronicle, which is to put out a challenge to a narrative, a completely inaccurate portrayal of the Haredi community, which has been quite common both in the non-Jewish media, but also in the Jewish press, in the mainstream Jewish press. And some of the accusations and some of the inaccuracies are quite extreme. They are, just to use the most recent example of without naming names, but an opinion piece in the Jewish News, which basically accuses most Haredi men of being rapists. And that's as extreme as it gets. Now, part of the reason why this goes unchallenged is because the Haredi community, by and large, have, at least until recently, refused to engage with the outside world. And that has sort of left a vacuum, which has been filled by a minority of people, some who have legitimate grievances with their experience of the Haredi community, and some who have another agenda. And whilst I welcome criticism, and I often get involved on the critical side as well, but what I really am extremely concerned about is the way that the extreme examples of a handful of members who have been mistreated as part of their experience in the Haredi community is held up as the standard example of who the Haredi community are. And that is often extended to people questioning the legitimacy of the Haredi way of life and even their humanity. To call people rapists because of Haredi approach to marriage is, in my opinion, beyond the pale. It is not even an argument that needs to be addressed. It needs to be condemned. It should never have happened. And I think, and the one thing I can say is that I am extremely grateful to the Board of Deputies, because this is exactly what we need. It is a forum where members of the Haredi community can engage with members of the Jewish community beyond the Haredi walls. And I will certainly be extremely happy to address any question, any genuine question, no matter how awkward or uncomfortable it might be, because I think it is important for people to gain a better understanding of their Haredi brothers and sisters. And I think when we understand each other better, automatically, there is no room for people with hidden agendas to hijack that platform.
Thank you very much for opening for us, Eli. I'll now come to Shmuel Yosef. Over to you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm known for running Chaverim Youth Organization, which was something which, when I came back from yeshiva some 29 years ago, I felt that within the Haredi community, the boys particularly didn't have an after-school outlet, something where they can go kick a ball, play a game of table tennis, and do just general stuff which boys want to do. And I felt a very big passion for that. I saw a niche, and I started up a small organization back here in South Tottenham, where I've lived all my life. And I created something called Chaverim Youth Organization. From a very small beginning, from a group of about 10 or 15 boys, it's grown over the 28 years now to something very big, with residential camps, leadership programs, evening programs, after school programs, etc. And I'm a great believer that to offer these boys an outlet which is accepted for them, accepted for their families, and done in a way where they can feel they can grow and gain as regular boys that grow up as good teenagers through their years and then become good members of society, like others do as well. And that passion has driven me over the years and given me a lot of push to do all I can for the boys. I'm also very much involved outside of the community, never mind the Charedi community. I'm involved in multi-faith on my borough. I very much engage with other communities. I like to speak to other communities. I like to show them that us, particularly in the Charedi community, we're not that scary, closed-in group. We can engage. We can talk to others. We can share things. And I like to show people we are part of a community. We live in an area. We like to take part. We like to be involved. And that's something which drives me all the time to do. And doing that, I got very involved in working with the local authority where I live, which is Haringey, and over many years actually agreed with Haringey, for example, the area where the community lives, a planning policy which has not been agreed anywhere else in the country, which allows the Charedi families, who are largish families, to extend their houses to a way where it had a design which was accepted and affordable for everyone to stay and live in the area, and again work with the authority, got them to understand. I'm also I work very closely with the police. I chair the independent advisory panel of the police here in the borough. Again, I like to engage outside of the community. I like to bring them in, show them what the community is all about, let them learn and understand, help them to engage. When there's times where they feel that they're being blocked out, bring them in, explain them, show them, and show that the Charedi community is not that closed-in, shut-shop community which people just think that they can't talk to, can't engage with, can't nothing to do with. I'm passionate about engagement, in community cohesion, in bringing others involved. And at the same time, I'm really passionate about building the community that I've grown up in, that I've lived in. When I grew up as a youngster here in the area, there wasn't very much. My education started off in Stamford Hill. I went to yeshiva, and after that, I just took the drive myself and moved on to do things which will drive others, motivate others, and to show over the years that us as a community can engage, can still be our nice, good community and be able to do things and achieve together with the outside community as well. Tonight, I'm happy to take questions on what I do. I'm happy to talk about the work and engage with everybody on this panel.
Shmuel Yosef, thank you very much for that. And I'm now going to turn to Michelle, who's joining us from Manchester. So, Michelle, if you could unmute yourself.
Very good. That's a good idea. Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I've not really been involved with the Board of Deputies very long. Due to the COVID work I've been doing for COVID in Manchester, I got to know a few colleagues, and they've already been very helpful in some of the work that I'm doing for the community and some of the work that I want to get, the lobbying I want to do in various areas. So most importantly, I'm coming from a different place. First of all, I'm a mother. I've got 5 wonderful children, 3 married, 4 grandchildren and 2 on the way. And that is first and foremost my most important thing in my life. As an introduction to what I do in my career, I want to tell everybody I don't see colours. I don't see black, I don't see white or anything in between. The only way that I can help people is by just taking them as they are. I'm passionately in defence of the Charedi community, but I would be passionately in defence of anybody that I help. So about 18 years ago, when the government was setting up Shore Start Children's Centres, an offer was made in Salford for a part-time coordinator to match services for the Charedi community. That was for a good room in Manchester. I started, I had my background was in teaching. I'd had all my 5 children, and I started working 12 hours a week, which then developed into me getting a building from the government, and the Hershel Weiss Children and Family Centre was born. And we now have a massive service. It's aimed at the Haredi community, but it's open to everybody. We have baby clinics, we have our own Citizens Advice Bureau, we have a wonderful, we do drop-in play, we do sensory projects with the elderly care homes. We're involved in everything in the community. It is the biggest privilege for me to be able to do this. Again, I could see very much, so I'm not judgmental, and I could see that a lot of young mothers and young families were struggling because basically they needed services bringing to them. They were not, no matter what we tried to do, they were not going to go and join services in the outside world. We've got women that weren't educated, we've got children that were missing out on early years education and early start. So we brought that all into the Children's Centre. To give you an example of numbers, we currently have 650 families we are working with on our books at one time. One of my board of management told me off for using this term, but what gives me the greatest privilege at the moment is that everything you see, if you Google Hershel Weiss Centre or Michelle Ciffer, you'll see loads of fantastic adverts about the services we offer. But I call it a front, although there was a few questions about that from a board of management, and because behind the scenes we deal with the most awful stories of poverty, of sometimes abuse, mental health, and we are able to help people because they accept us and we are confidential. We never even publicly fundraise for that side of the work. We are very lucky that we've got fantastic partners with local authority. We partner with various charities in London, and I feel like it's the greatest privilege. Being on the front line is really difficult. I mean, our centre is in the centre of the community, and anyone can walk in any situation, day or night, or call me on my mobile, or call one of my staff and needing help. And that's what we do. That's what we're there for, and that's what we do. In my other role, I always say I'm not a strategic person, but somehow I've become a very strategic person. Although my role is literally, you tell me what needs to be done, and the next day it'll be done. But I'm also chair of the Orthodox Jewish Forum, which we meet together with high-level local authority people who are in the same positions as us, and we lobby for change within the community, and we've had very lot of success within that. Everybody is my friend, no matter who you are, Jewish or not Jewish, Haredi or not Haredi, and that's the way I think it should be, and that's why it's successful.
Michelle, thank you.
How was that?
It was a great nutshell. Thank you. And Rabbi Avi Lazarus.
Thank you, Gillian. So as you mentioned, I'm the CEO of the Federation of Synagogues, and I have been in that role for nearly 6 years. Just to give a bit of context and perspective to my comments this evening, I'd just like to mention, I think I'm the only one of the 4 panelists who didn't grow up within the Haredi community. I grew up in Kenton in northwest London. I went to a Jewish primary school, Sinai, but a non-Jewish secondary school, City of London. And after A-levels, went to yeshiva and spent some time in Israel, and then Gateshead, and then back in Israel, and have worked my entire working life for the Jewish community, within roles in the Jewish community. First for Diane Ehrentreu in founding a Kollel Edgeware, then for Seed for 8 years, and the last 6 years for the Federation. So the Federation was, in modern times, I guess, and Haredi, the Haredi community, I guess is a relatively modern issue, was probably the original Haredi community within the UK. At the turn of the last century, the poorer Eastern European Jews who moved to this country formed and didn't find a home in London, London's East End, in terms of the establishment that already existed. And they, Lord Montagu on their behalf, formed the Federation of Synagogues, and it really became the home for the more Heimish Jews coming from Eastern Europe. It was really pretty large. In the interwar years was the largest synagogal body. but then really got taken over in terms of its role of being the organisation for the Haredi community around the time of the 1930s, 1940s, with the formation of the Union of Orthodox Hebrew Congregations. And I guess dwindled from the times after the war, certainly in numbers, possibly in mission also, until about 7 years ago. And what happened 7 years ago was there were a bunch of Federation members headed by Andrew Cohen, who were elected as the new chairman and trustees. And they'd identified a huge gap in the market, certainly in London and possibly in England or in the UK, that within Orthodoxy, traditional Orthodoxy was well taken care of by the United Synagogue and the Office of the Chief Rabbi. The right-wing Haredi community was well taken care of by the Union of Orthodox Hebrew Congregations. However, they identified a huge gap in the middle of people who possibly didn't feel they had a Jewish organisation that represented them, and therefore they were already members of the Federation, but they sought to reposition the Federation to become the organisation that serves, leads, and represents what you might call let's say the centrist or more moderate Haredi community. And the Haredi community is a difficult one to define anyway, because you'll have, I know of people who will self-identify as Haredi who are vastly different from each other, incredibly diverse from those who may send their schools send their children to schools like Menorah Foundation in Northwest London, to those who send their schools to send their children to schools in Stamford Hill, the most right-wing elements of Stamford Hill. All will consider themselves in some ways to be Haredi. So the Haredi community is a very broad community. But as I said, there was a huge gap not being serviced. So Andrew Cohen and co. sought to change that. And over the last 6 years, we've started services such as Shiloh Text, Meister Text, FedTech, all services that seek to engage and serve that constituency of the Frum community. And new personnel have been brought on board to revitalise the Federation based in Diane Hall and Diane Posen, household names within the Frum community, and culminating, I guess, with what might be considered the icing on the cake in the last year of recruiting Rabbi Zimmerman from Gateshead, previously the Gateshead Rav, who for many was considered, possibly is still considered, hopefully is still considered, the rabbinic authority outside of the Hasidic world from Jews in England. And we saw that as a huge statement, and hopefully a huge moving forward for the Federation. And please don't we look forward to a fantastic future.
Thank you very much, Abby, and thank you to all of our panelists for setting out their stall individually and doing it so concisely and clearly, which I know that our audience is appreciating. So thank you. I'm going to do some follow-up questions now before I turn to the questions from the audience, and I'm going to go in reverse order. So I'm going to come to you first, Avi. Avi, you referenced the fact that you did not grow up in the Haredi community. I'm sure that many people like me would love to know more about that. And what was it that attracted you to the Haredi community?
That's a tough one. Okay, thank you. Just to clarify, I was always Shomer Shabbos observant growing up, so it wasn't in many ways a huge shift from where I was to where I moved to. However, certainly in mindset, it was. I didn't really know many Haredi people, and I would even possibly categorize two types of people growing up within the Jewish community, Frummers and normal people. And I consider myself firmly placed within the latter category. However, aged 18, having been Shomer Shabbos observant until that time, but feeling that I didn't have the same level of knowledge to back up my observance, I decided that either I was going to really try to learn more about my Judaism, my heritage, and Torah sources, etc., and make a decision one way or the other, either to do Judaism properly, or to do the other way properly as well, and not sit on the fence, as it were. So I decided to go to a yeshiva when I was 18, which was, I guess, the first dipping my toe into the Haredi world properly. And I loved it. I was drawn to it, to the warmth, the idealism, to the thirst for knowledge, to the altruism that I found within the community. Although I knew lots of special people in the world that I grew up in, I didn't feel a society with a sense of mission and direction and purpose and truth-seeking that I found within the Haredi community. So I ended up learning for the best part of 8 or 9 years in yeshiva and kollel in England and in Israel. I never really made a decision to enter the Haredi community. It was just something that happened automatically. I would say growing up, it wouldn't have been in my wildest, I should say, nightmare, not even dream, that one day I would be sitting on speaking on a panel representing the Haredi community. But anyway, here we are today, and thank God, very fortunate in the position that I am working in the Federation, to be working with some fantastic people, hopefully continuing to provide for the Haredi community and for many people that, as I said before, don't feel that they have been supported by an organisation, and so on. That's what we're seeking to do.
Thank you for sharing all of that with us, Avi. I was interested. You couldn't have dreamt of being on a panel in this setting. Probably most of us couldn't have dreamt we'd be doing what we do. So that is the wonderful thing. You never know what's going to happen. I'd like to come to Michelle now to follow up. Michelle, you talked about running a large centre and the work that you do. You mentioned you do a lot with the local authority. Can you give us just a few pointers on what kind of challenges that you faced in terms of getting the local authority or local authorities to understand the needs of the community?
I think some of the first of all, the biggest challenge for me with the local authorities, that I'm very passionate, and there are things that are known within the local authority as Michelle Ciffer emails when I go off on one, because I am extremely passionate in defence of the community. And the biggest challenge for me is sometimes that I just don't understand that they know what we know. And that you even in 18 years of working closely, and most of them will have been on a short cultural awareness tour and watch something like Strictly Kosher on TV, and that's what they'll think the Orthodox Jewish community is. But an example would be when I was once very involved with the social services case, and the social workers at the time didn't even realise that Dad wouldn't look at the social workers because that was the way he was. It wasn't disrespectful, but he wouldn't look at me either because I was a female, and that's not out of disrespect. That's the way he is. And when you're dealing with a child protection situation, and social workers have got to work so intimately in a family's home, that causes a massive amount of issues and problems. We've done a lot of work with social workers. I mean, we've explained to them Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock isn't the best time to turn up at a Jewish Orthodox family's house. The thing is also, like, we've just got to lower our expectations. And the other, with what we understand, I mean, I've just launched a massive project with a local authority to give kosher food vouchers for children in private schools that don't get free school dinners. We've partnered it together. And I didn't even click that these people do not know where the kosher shops are, even though, they live in Salford. And I'm like, well, just go to Kosher Savers. And they're like, have they got a website? They don't get that. And I think the other thing is that something that it's not just a Jewish problem, it's a general problem when you're working as hard as I am in the voluntary sector, the third voluntary sector. You deal sometimes with people that are very corporate and they want things done their way. An example of that would be the food banks that were involved with setting up around COVID, and the senior management in the council wanted very much to go with us. The middle management said, no, we can do this, and for 3 weeks, people were getting non-kosher food parcels, and there was such a mess. And I turned around to the mayor and I said, why didn't you just not hand this over to us, because we just understand how to do this? And that's not just a Jewish problem, that's a general problem. I mean, I'm involved with a lot of other voluntary sector partners where when you're in the heart of the community and you're dealing with people corporately who are further removed, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish or Muslim, these are grassroots community projects, especially at times when we're in crisis like COVID, know our jobs inside out and need to be used. And you have to prove that over and over again. So that's a few. I mean, I could go on, but a few of the little issues.
No, you've illustrated them really well for us, Michelle, and brought it very alive. Thank you. Shmuel Yosef, I know that you are very active in interfaith forums. Could you tell us a bit about why that's important to you?
I feel very much and very passionate that others who are involved in religions should see us as an upfront community, a community who they can talk to, a community who they can engage with, and we can all sit around the table together and be one set of people, and all of us still running our own lives in our own way and respecting each other. And over the years, I've worked passionately on that, and particularly in Haringey, and I've got to know many, many interesting people, share very many interesting scenarios and situations. And for me, that part of my drive to engage community cohesion is engaging with these other communities, with these other, particularly on multi-faith forums, who sometimes will look at us with a very negative eye. Will look at us and they will hear and see things in the press about the Jewish community which are negative, which sometimes plays out a very lot, and they won't understand or see that, no, we're not actually like that. We're actually a normal group of people going about our lives every day, doing regular jobs, doing normal things. Our children go to good schools. We have, we have a vast amount of things happening. We're, a very big, active community, and we're not what people look at us in a very negative eye. And I'm so keen and so open with that and passionate about that. And that's why also I chair the independent advisory panel of the police in Haringey. I meet on that panel about 25 people from across the borough, from all sorts of life, from all different communities. And questions come up and things come up, particularly over COVID, things came up, questions about the community. And there again, we can answer them, we can engage them, we can show them, we can talk about it, we can be upfront, we can share ideas. And I believe it just helps us as a community to live over here, live together, and the people around us respect us more, respect us for what we are, and it makes everything around together much easier.
Thank you. It is important work, interfaith work, that is for sure. So thank you for explaining why you had that passion for that work. And I'd now like to come to Ellie. And I've got my own question. I want to reflect on something that I saw that you wrote, Ellie, and then I've had an additional question from Joe. So thank you to Joe for this question. But so what I would like to raise is about Haredi education and teaching about the LGBT plus community. The article that or the way in which you've written before, I know that you've argued that homophobia is not a feature of the Haredi education system. So it would be helpful if you could explain to us about how you came to that view. That's the first point. And then if I could just refer briefly to the question from Joe, who'd like to know what you would see the life trajectory of a gay man born into a Haredi community who wants to stay religious and live as a gay man. So first of all, on the view that you put forward in your writing, and secondly, on the question from Joe. And perhaps when Ellie's answered that, because Joe asked about the other panelists, I'll also come to the other panelists, and the next one I'll come to is Avi. So, Ellie.
Okay, thank you. So the article you referred to is an article that I wrote for the Jewish Chronicle in response to an article written by a journalist working in the Jewish Chronicle at the time. I think he might work for the Board of Deputies now. I'm not sure. And where the picture was presented as if the Haredi community is riddled with homophobia, children being driven to suicide and self-harm as a direct result of the suppression of homosexuality. And my response to that was that anyone who can claim that this is an accurate portrayal of the Haredi community is either deliberately disingenuous or simply lacks a basic understanding of how the Haredi community works. And specifically, I should point out the Stamford Hill community, the community I come from and the community that I work in. And my central point was that there is an automatic assumption that the more religiously conservative a community is, the more rabidly homophobic it would be. But what is often misunderstood about the Haredi community is that Haredi parents, almost all of them, certainly in Stamford Hill, maintain a strict policy of zero sexualization of children, of school-age children. And this goes extremely far. They go to extraordinary lengths not to approach the subject of sex or sexuality whatsoever. Now, we can have another discussion of why that is. And frankly, I don't think everyone knows exactly those various theories. Some would say that it helps with the gender segregation that the community maintains. Some would say that it supports the principle of not engaging in sexual activity outside of marriage, and that makes it easier for children growing up being kept ignorant and innocent. Whatever the reason is, that is a reality, that this is a very strict policy that pretty much all Haredi parents would share. And therefore, this is not a question of refusing to teach children about LGBT lifestyles. This is a community that would go as far as censoring our own Chumash, our own Gemara, all sorts of scriptures, just so that children are not exposed to any sexual matters. Now, as perhaps an unintended consequence of this policy is that at no point will a child in a Haredi school come across any homophobia whatsoever. They won't come across anything to do with LGBT lifestyles at all, because they won't come across anything to do with heterosexual lifestyles. So to present the Haredi community as a community that has a problem with homophobia is completely surreal. And in fact, I would argue that when you compare the Haredi community to other religious communities, I would probably say that homophobia is far less of a problem in the Haredi community than it is in more mainstream religious communities, where children are exposed to the general, whether it's popular culture or whatever it is. And therefore, a child who attends a mainstream modern Orthodox, perhaps Jewish school, would tell you that it's pretty common for either a girl who displays masculine behavior or a boy displaying feminine behavior will be targeted with homophobic abuse, banter, bullying, and that simply doesn't exist in the Haredi community. And that was my argument. And now to the second part of to Joe's question of what is the trajectory of a gay man in the Haredi community. Now, I don't know if someone's life trajectory has to be defined by their sexuality, but one thing that I'm not going to pretend is that there is a way of, or at least if there is one, I don't think anyone has figured it out yet, of reconciling an active homosexual lifestyle with Orthodox Judaism. That quite simply, I don't make the rules and I'm in no position to change them, but the reality is that the biblical position on homosexuality is clear, and there's no way that anyone who claims to be committed to Orthodox Judaism can change that. Now, what we can do is, of course, be more supportive of people who are gay, lesbian, or any members of the LGBT community, and say to them, look, if you are committed to Orthodox Judaism, then we should do more, perhaps create support groups, whatever it is, and I'm not claiming to be an expert on this at all. And finally, I would say, is that I think someone who is gay, is a member of the LGBT community, and remains committed to Orthodox Judaism is an absolute hero. I take my hat off to him or her, because I'm not sure I would be able to do it. I'm not here offering solutions. The reality is what it is. I'm not convinced that the United Synagogue does a better job when they say to gay members of the community that I'm sorry, but we can't officiate a gay wedding. Because if you're committed to Orthodoxy, Orthodox Judaism, that is the biblical position. So I think the Haredi community simply doesn't have a more stringent view on homosexuality, and in fact, it simply doesn't feature that much. And therefore, just to wrap up, again, I would say I strictly maintain that in the Haredi school system, homophobia is not a feature at all. And as far as the life trajectory, to quote Joe's phrase, for a gay member of the Haredi community, like I said, they deserve more support, and hats off to them for sticking with Orthodox Judaism while being gay.
Thank you very much for answering those points. We've actually getting a lot of questions in, so I'm going to turn to Avi, as I promised him I would do, to put to him a question from Gary Mond, and I'll come around to some of the other panelists too. And thank you for your question, Gary. And the question is, to what extent is the Haredi community affected by poverty, and is the situation getting better or worse? Avi.
Yes. So I think the Haredi community, as with other communities, has an element of poverty. I think possibly because within the Haredi community, families tend to be blessed with more children, then you're dividing up the parent salaries between more mouths to feed. So it could be considered that children are materially poorer because it's divided by more people. However, I would certainly say that that's only in material terms. Children don't consider themselves to be growing up poor, and certainly in terms of family and relationship terms, the wealth of growing up in a large family far surpasses any negative aspect of growing up with less physical things.
Thank you. Thanks, Avi. I'll come to Michelle. Can you tell us about poverty getting better or worse?
Right. This is a really, really emotional, hard question to answer, because my main work is dealing with families living in poverty. I can tell everybody at the moment the situation of those families is absolutely dire. We have about 500 or more families that were not in poverty, regular working people that have been affected so severely by COVID, because the people that were in the middle, where they had middle class or small businesses, and are the ones that have been affected the most. I've had stories before Pesach, before Passover, where and local authority gave me £10,000 in kosher supermarket vouchers to give out, where a family whose mother was she was a self-employed Senko, dad had a private gardening business where he was selling things online. She told me, a lovely family, never ever had to use food banks before. She told me straight out that they did not know where the next meal was coming from. The situation in our community is really bad. I'm working on, I've been working for the last 4 months very proudly across the community on the COVID response, initially dealing with the emergency situation, and now looking at the impact of COVID. The use of food banks is just growing and growing. I have people phoning me and saying, can I just, I work very closely with the National Lottery. They've also given me money for emergency food to give out. Somebody said I just had to go next door and borrow money from my brother to pay for food. This is a new thing. I mean, I have currently have a project running for the summer. We normally do summer trips for 1,500 people. We can't. So this year we've opened up a fund in memory of my late husband, give out grants for people to afford holidays. If you could see my table, I'm glad you can't. I have piles of applications from people that just apply for £150 to be able to pay for transport to get to places. I'll just read you one, and I think something Avi said when he said this just made me read. I wanted to read this to you. Our motto is happy to have nothing and owe nothing. We both work in teaching. Main expense is tuition, about £3,000 a month. We go every year for holidays, day trips, overnight camping. We have a 5-seater car which my son can drive. I booked a 7-seater for 10 days of the holiday. Ideally, I'd like 9-seaters and more days. Many thanks. They've got such love in their family. They're not bothered the whole year round. But this year, because and remember, most people could be on minimum wage. So to be furloughed 80% of minimum wage when you're barely making ends meet is a massive impact. A lot of the people don't know, what's going to happen at the end of this. They don't know if they're going to have jobs. Businesses have just shut down overnight. Small businesses. We are living in really, really tricky times, as well as the fact that the government, something the Board of Deputies is working with us on, has cut benefits down, so you only get child tax credits and I can't remember exactly for 2 children. And in the past, and I'm extremely passionate and I say things as they are. And I told you at the beginning, I'm completely non-judgmental, and I've been told by charities that I work with in London and other places, well, why should we come and help? Because you have such big families. One thing that my husband, blessed the memory, my husband died in January, told me, and it is completely my mantra for everything that I do. Whatever we say, big families, small families, it's not the children's fault. None of this is the children's fault or the family's fault. And we just have to close our eyes and put in as much effort as we can to support them. And the main work that we're doing at the moment in Manchester is literally on the ground, helping people with these dire poverty issues.
Thanks very much for that one, and for explaining to us how you feel about it yourself. Really important.
Very
to hear.
strongly. Yeah.
We hear that. Thank you. I'm going to move to the question from Melanie Morris Kelly, where Melanie asks, she comments first of all, it's heartwarming to hear that there is work going on between the Haredi community and others in the arena of interfaith. Can you see a time when the same dialogue will be shown towards dialogue with Jews of other denominations? So thanks for the question, Melanie, and I'll turn firstly to Shmuel Yosef.
Yeah, hi. Firstly, I'd like to say that there is a lot going on. It may not always be upfront and noticeable. And I'll just talk about, for example, myself. I've become a deputy in the Board of Deputies, which is a rare thing for somebody from the Haredi community to do. My shul where I daven is still the United Synagogue here in South Tottenham. And in that particular shul, we have all sorts of people davening, praying, coming together, from the very ultra Hasidic to your traditional United Synagogue Jew, and everyone's happy to be in there together. I myself, I engage a lot outside across the community, and there are many people who do try and engage and do try and bring everybody in together as one community. No, I'm not saying it's all not creamy on the front, and there are a lot of people who won't do that. And I'll give you a big example. Several years back, I got involved with the CST on behalf of the Haredi community, and I brought the two together. This was something, again, working with people who really didn't understand the dynamics of the Haredi community, didn't really get it always, and the Haredi community not understanding the concept of security and how they work. And we've managed to bring the two sorts of people together, and a lot of tremendous amounts of positive has come out for the Haredi community. I engage with a lot of communities, a lot of other people. I think the president herself will be witness that what goes on in my house on Hanukkah and Purim from across the board, from across communities. I bring people together, and we do try. Not everybody does, but there are people who will go out that way and go that step further to be inviting and engaging to other Jews across all other communities.
Thank you very much for that. Indeed, our President Marie has told me of the occasions at your home, so I know how much she's enjoyed them, as have other people. So thank you. I want to add on to this, and I'll come to Michelle first after I've referred to the question from Liv Green. And Liv, thank you very much for your question. It's a bit of a follow-on. So Liv says, as a progressive Jew, I feel quite removed from the Haredi community, particularly due to the very strict gender roles. How connected do you feel to the other Jewish denominations in the UK? I think it would also be interesting to pick up Liv's point about gender roles. So Michelle has volunteered to go first on this.
Number one, I think I'm a bit of an enigma when it comes to gender roles because I'm head of a Aguda in Manchester, and there's not a lot of women around. There's not a lot of Haredi women around the country who have a gender role like I have. But I have to say one thing, Liv. I have a very high-profile job. I love what I do, but I also love being a Jewish woman and a Jewish mother and making Shabbos and Yom Tov. I embrace every kind of role. I'm very proud of the fact that our organisation, the Hershel Weiss Centre, has made what's called WOW, a women's network, business network, which we have over 40 members and promoting women in business. So we're trying to do the best we can. Just to go back to something that we were discussing before about the wider community, I was going to mention this at the end. I think the proudest achievement and coming out of, unfortunately, because of COVID, is in Manchester. And I know that the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council have said this is unique to Manchester. We set up a COVID steering group run by the CST and the Jewish Leadership Council, which was invited every single representative from Jewish community, from progressive to ultra-Orthodox Haredi. We have achieved the most unbelievable things over the last 4 months. It was an action-focused group, and because of that unique work that we did together, that in 20 years of working community service, that we've never been able to work together, we have now set up a much bigger group that looking wider on how we can continue to work together. And I'm really proud that I managed to work with colleagues from across in order to make a difference to anybody that was affected. And we want to be able to put that into our daily work in the future.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Ellie, I know you'd like to add a bit on the question that's been raised about other Jewish denominations and gender roles.
Right. So on the question about whether we can engage with other Jewish denominations. Now, at the moment, it is certainly true that there's far more interfaith activity taking place in the Haredi community than there is interdenominational activity within the Jewish community. I think part of the reason is because when representatives of the Haredi community engage with representatives of the Christian or Muslim communities, I think there is a basic understanding that neither is there to challenge each other's religious views. There is a starting position of respect, and I don't think there is any attempt to impose views on each other. And therefore, I think the forum takes on a very practical and friendly role, and I think that's great. In order for that to happen between the Haredi community and especially the non-Orthodox Jewish denominations, the fact is that Orthodox Judaism, or at least traditional Orthodoxy, actually, in fact, even Neo-Orthodoxy, was very much based on strict opposition to non-Orthodoxy. In fact, the opposition to non-Orthodoxy is probably the best definition of the Haredi community. The Haredi community is so broad a spectrum that what unites them as a coalition is opposition to non-Orthodox denominations. And in fact, even centrist Orthodox movements, until very recently at least, and even the very open-minded and enlightened figures like Rabbi Sachs, refused to attend Limud for the entirety of his tenure as chief rabbi, and there was the Louis Jacobs affair and various examples where the strict policy of not legitimizing non-Orthodox denominations existed. So what I'm saying is that in order for us to engage with non-Orthodox denominations, I think that would have to take place outside of the theological arena. That would have to be a cultural or commercial forum. One thing that comes to mind is a good friend of mine, Ari Pfefferkorn, who is the founder of J-Trade, which is a perfect opportunity in a non-contentious, non-religious, non-segregated setting, in fact, where it is an initiative designed for the Jewish community, and it is available to anyone, in fact, even to non-Jews, but it is made for the Jewish community, and that is a perfect way to engage, to meet, and to interact. But as soon as it comes anywhere close to theology, to religion, that's where things will get quite tricky, I think. And just a point on gender roles. I'm becoming increasingly aware of the bad optics when a man talks about the position of women. And I've written about this recently, and I think we need to find more women. And I think on this panel, it is for Michelle to ultimately make the judgment on how women feel in the community. But one thing is certainly true to say, that in the Haredi community, a housewife is not a dirty word, and it is very much valued and respected. And the fact that there is traditional gender roles doesn't undermine, or doesn't necessarily have to undermine, happiness and fulfillment of people. And the Haredi community certainly is a community that puts family values and the nuclear and extended family first. But as to how women actually feel and their position, I would rather, in this case, Michelle, but just generally, it is for women in the Haredi community to make that judgment.
Thanks very much, Eli. Before I turn to the next question, which is one from Gabriel Martindale about Israel, I'd just like to draw everyone's attention to the opportunity, if you feel able, because whilst we're very happy, of course, to bring this podcast and this issue to you in your homes, everybody, if you do feel able to support the Board of Deputies in our work, particularly in these challenging times, we are running the opportunity, as you can see on the screen, to text BODCAST10 to 70450 in order to donate £10, and all donations will be extremely welcome. I'd now like to turn to the question on Israel, and thank you very much, Gabriel, for the question, which is, what is your attitude to Zionism and the state of Israel? Avi.
Okay. Zionism, actually in many ways like being Haredi, is a term that means different things to different people. So I'm going to talk more about the state of Israel. Not a big question, but I think it'll be clear from what I said about the state of Israel how I feel. I'm very fortunate to have lived a total of about 6 years in Israel and actually made Aliyah. I think that the formation of the state of Israel was a miracle for which myself and most of the Jewish world are extremely grateful to Hashem for. I think the background behind the question is that stereotypically the Haredi community is depicted as being rather skeptical of the state of Israel, possibly negative towards it. I think that was possibly the case at the time of the formation. I think that a lot of that has eroded since then, and practically speaking now the Haredi community within the state of Israel is fully participating in the Knesset and in every walk of life within professional life, and is integrating more. I think possibly where the question came from is, as I said, the feeling that Haredim don't appreciate or don't fully get excited in the same way as the way the mainstream community does about the state of Israel. And I think a parable that was given by the Chofetz Chaim, a rabbi in Lithuania in the 1930s, was, we've been, as a Jewish community, we're now in the 3 weeks of mourning between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. We mourn the fact that we have been away from Israel and without a Beis HaMikdash, a temple in Jerusalem for 2,000 years. We prayed 3 times a day, and every time we benched, we prayed, Hashem, please bring us back to Jerusalem so that we can serve you there with a fullness of relationship. And the Chofetz Chaim was asked, what do you think of Zionism? And this is before the state of Israel. And he said, if it hadn't rained for 2,000 years, and you see a cloud, so it's not rain, but it's certainly a cause for smile. It's a divine smile. And the state of Israel, I think, has now become, more than just a cloud. Possibly not gushing rainfall yet, but please God, we look forward to the time of the third temple. Please God.
Thank you very much, Avi. Eli.
I think the simplest answer probably is that the majority of Haredim are probably ideologically opposed to Zionism, but practically extremely supportive of the state of Israel. And I think this goes back to the very early days of Zionism, when Zionism, especially secular Zionism, in fact mainly secular Zionism, was very much promoted and sold as the new Judaism and a sort of the redemption of the traditional Jew. And that has very much been the legacy that traditional Judaism is steeped in. But if you look at the Agudas Yisrael movement, which now is obviously a major political force in Israel, but pre-war Agudas Yisrael movement were very much pro settlement of the land of Israel. They would, in fact, they had their own Hachshara farms to promote Aliyah, and also had their own fund of purchasing land in the land of Israel. I think the term Zionism as an ideology is actually quite strongly opposed by Haredi Jews simply because of the challenge it poses to traditional Jewry. But I think if you look at the Hamedia, which is the flagship Haredi newspaper in the UK, if you open any edition of the Hamedia, you've probably got twice as much content dedicated to Israel than you do in the Jewish Chronicle. The Haredim are very much engaged with Israeli politics and Israeli news, and I think for all intents and purposes, they are deeply supportive of the state of Israel, but symbolically and ideologically, I think there is opposition.
Thank you very much, Eli. And I want to come to Michelle for the next question, which is one from Rebecca Liss. Thank you, Rebecca, for your question. So, Michelle, what Rebecca's saying is that I've heard that group identity is very important in the Haredi community, and it is shown through clothing and style choices. For example, wearing a certain type of hat or kippah or curling your payot. Why is this group distinction important? Or Rebecca invites you to correct her misunderstanding. So I'll ask Michelle about this one.
Sorry, let me just unmute. I looked at this one because you're all going to have a laugh, because as well as what I do in a day job, I also run I started about a year and a half ago, a modest fashion brand, which I wanted to bring modest fashion to a community at modest prices. So now going back to what I said at the beginning, I don't see kippahs, hats, or whatever. It doesn't make a difference to me. I've got 3 married children. One of my sons wears a strimal, which I think is a most stunning, beautiful piece of fur and looks amazing on him. One of mine wears a traditional hat and one wears a small kippah. The question is, it's yes, we do have sections within the community of different types of sections, but this is all to do with tradition. It's to do with what was worn. Really about, you have to look past. People will think that the children with the curly payas or the men that wear the furry hats are more religious than the other sects of the community. Actually, it's not true, because religious is about what's inside, and it's about the spirituality and how you feel inside. It's just about how you identify with that group. So you perhaps might want to wear short hair because that's the way you are, and it's about the tradition of the sector that you're part of and the group that you're part of, but it doesn't really say so much about you as a person. I mean, that's the way I feel. What says about you as a person is what is actually inside, and you can get somebody that wears a kippah shugah who is far more spiritual than somebody who is, I mean, I'm not judging anyone that wears a big furry hat and goes to synagogue on the Sabbath and is struggling to connect with God. So it's more about traditions and lifestyles of what you've been used to bringing up in, rather than who you are as a person.
Thank you very much for that, Michelle. And I don't know where the time's gone, but we're on to the last question before I come to each of the panelists to do a minute of anything that they would like to say following this evening's panel to bring it all to an end. But the last question is a very appropriate one, and I know will touch many of us. So thank you to David Newman for his question, which says, perhaps it would be appropriate to say something about the late and departed Rabbi Pinter, who contributed so much to the Charedi and wider communities. Shmuel Yosef.
Absolutely right. Rabbi Pinter was somebody outstanding, somebody who engaged with all the communities, somebody who was an ambassador for us all, somebody who was a mentor to me, who showed me the way of being an activist and how you should do things. We miss him lots. He was a man who stood up for rights. He was a man who stood up for Jewish education. He was a man who engaged across the community with everybody. His memory will go on for a long time. He is somebody who I believe the whole Jewish community will miss, and miss in a very big way. Rabbi Pinter was just an outstanding, amazing man who achieved so much in his years for the whole community and was passionate about what he wanted to do and kept on with it without nothing to stop him. And all I can say is Rabbi Pinter's memory is something that will stay for me for a very long time.
I'm sure that Shmuel Yosef, many people share that view. He was a very, very dear friend to the Board of Deputies and to many of us individually. So thank you for those very appropriate comments. I'm going to ask each of the panel to, and we'll go back in the order we started, just to give us a final comment. So if my memory serves me right, I believe that Eli was the first to go, and you'll be the first now.
That's right. So thank you. I would say if you look at all the major studies done on the Jewish demographics in the UK in recent years, it's becoming fairly obvious that it's a matter of time before the Haredi community will constitute either a majority of British Jews or at least a very significant minority. The time to pretend that the Haredi community is some closed little group living on the margins in a little ghetto somewhere in northeast London are over. We can't, anyone who cares about the future of the Jewish community as a whole has to think about this fundamental questions. What role will the Haredi community play in British Jewry in the coming decades? And the answer to this question, the Haredi community needs an answer to this question, and so does the mainstream British community. I think the Haredi community needs to recognize that it now plays a much bigger role and will increasingly play a bigger role in the British Jewish conversation, and therefore we need to mature a little bit more. We need to engage better with people outside the community. We need to obviously ensure, and this is regardless of our demographic success, ensure that our next generation is well educated and can be confident and proud with their own community without feeling as if they've been robbed of the basics of a decent education. The rest of the Jewish community, if they care about the future of the Jewish community, must recognize that the Haredi community is not an extreme cult, a British version of the Westboro Baptist Church or something like that. It is actually a traditionalist community, part of the Orthodox spectrum, and they should, in my opinion, give them the cultural autonomy to set their own values without having to answer to the whims and the trends of the latest anti-extremism think tank or anything like that. The Haredi community is growing, they have their values, they deserve to be respected. I think some of the language used against the Haredi community in British Jewish newspapers would never ever have been published had they been against any other minority. And I think that is something I'd love people to reflect on. And finally, I am really grateful to the Board of Deputies for facilitating this and for making this happen. I think this is fantastic, and I think we need similar events and more of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Michelle. The screen is yours.
Actually, okay, I was muted. Right, so I've scribbled loads of things down here. Number one, I want to tell you whoever's, I don't know who's watching. I mean, I've got an idea because I keep getting texts, but anybody from the wider community that doesn't know me, doesn't understand the Haredi community, I sometimes feel really judged by the Haredi community, and I feel by the wider community. And I feel that the people that I work with are really judged. And these are wonderful, amazing families and people. And there are organizations within our Haredi community, like my own, like Hatzalah and Misaskim, that didn't care over COVID whether you were religious, you were not religious, are there to help anybody. And that's what I want you to understand, that we also don't want to be judged, because we also feel like that. I'm going to say something very, two other points that I want to come back to that are really not bothering me. Number one is, obviously I mentioned before that my husband passed away in January, and he was even less judgmental than I was. He was extremely religious. He was known as a very straight, what we describe, Erlich man. He used to learn and pray a lot. He was also a black belt in Kung Fu, and he had Jewish and non-Jewish friends alike, and he would also he wouldn't judge anyone. He didn't make a difference whether you were rich or poor, and that's the only way forward for us. The biggest lesson that we've learned is what we pulled together in Manchester from the COVID Emergency Response Committee. Every single organization, wherever they came from, worked together in order to work together to make a difference and help us through the crisis. And the last thing I wanted to point out, because I've been asked this last year, I was on a Radio 4 program, I forgot, called Beyond Belief, and it was discussing feminism. And at the time when they asked me about it, I didn't really understand what feminism meant, apart from, and I want to answer the lady again, the point before that was raised about women and Jewish women's role. I don't know about feminism and women's lib or anything, but I love being feminine. I love the fact that I'm totally accepted in what I do, and I love the fact that in the role, and I know many, many more women like myself who love and are happy and content in the roles that we have as women. And please don't think that we are downtrodden and unhappy, and because we are not, and we are content, and we are extremely grateful that we don't have to put tefillin on and go to shul 3 times a day, because and we don't have set times to pray. And the one last point that I wanted to make is, of all the things that women have, what the highlight of everybody's week in the Haredi community, and I'm sure in the wider community, the Sabbath. And what are we privileged to give? We are privileged with the most beautiful mitzvah of lighting candles and bringing in the Sabbath, which is the most beautiful privilege for all of us. So anybody that says the women don't have as important role, I'm sorry, I disagree with you, and you can argue it about me another time. Thank you very much, and thank you for the Board of Deputies. It's been wonderful, wonderful experience to be part of this.
Thank you, Michelle. And your husband sounds an exceptional man, and may his memory be for a blessing.
He was.
Shmuel Yosef.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I would like to say that the Haredi community has so much positive about it. So many amazing organizations, so many amazing things happen. And I believe we get such an unfair press with 1 or 2 negative things which come up, and then we're just spread out as some very strange community. I want to say to all the listeners out there, we are a vast community. We're a very big community. There's lots of different people in the community, but you're welcome. Come and see. Come and join us. Let us show you around. Let us show you what we do. I think in Stamford Hill, there's about 43 schools. You only ever hear about the school which gets a bad Ofsted. Hear about the good schools. Hear about the good work, the positive stuff which is going on. I get so upset when I see and I read negative things about the Haredi community, when I know they do so much. They may not engage as well as you want them to do. They may not always be up front as you want them to do. They may do things which you'll see rather strange, but let's talk together. We are one community. We're all Jewish people. We're here to be one. We're here to live together in this country and enjoy what we can. Let's do this as one united community. I'm happy to engage with people. I'm happy to bring people in. There's so much good stuff going on here. There's so much happening. There's so much activity which we can share with others. Let's make this a positive experience and really move forward. I thank the board for bringing this together and giving us this wonderful opportunity and giving me this open forum to be able to say and speak my heart out a bit of what I feel and my passion. And I hope this evening will be the start of much, much more and much positive for the whole Jewish community in the United Kingdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Avi, you have the last word.
Thank you. What a privilege. I also want to thank the Board of Deputies for this fantastic initiative, and to tell my fellow panelists that I've been inspired by meeting you today and hearing your words and hearing about the way you represent and serve the Jewish community, in particular the Haredi community. I happened to have a phone call with the head of the Manchester Jewish Council today, and he told me something fascinating, which was he's been involved with the Jewish community for about 30 years. He said there are about 30,000 Jews in Manchester, and when he started working with the Jewish community 30 years ago, 4,000 of those were Haredi. He said now 15,000, 50% are now Haredi. And in fact, my first engagement with the Board of Deputies was through we have a forum of CEOs that meets 4 times a year. And in one of the first meetings I went to 3 or 4 years ago, we are asked to say a parting word about what we hope to do in the next year. I think it was 2016 or 2017. And I was startled to hear, I was at the table of maybe 20, 25 CEOs, I was startled to hear from 4 or 5 of them that the key task, the key goal that they had for the next 12 months was engagement with the Haredi community. And that's, care organizations, Maccabi, that spoke about wanting to engage the Haredi community. And everyone has come to the realization that we are one community and we need to work together and we need to engage each other. And that the Haredi part of the community now constitutes a very sizable part of it. It's no longer on the periphery as it was when I grew up. It's an extremely sizable and meaningful part of the community, and certainly it has its part to play. And I would like to extend my invitation to anyone who would like to dip their toes into a Haredi community, into a Haredi home for Shabbos. You're able to get my details from the Board of Deputies. Anyone's invited to come to my home for a Shabbos meal anytime, and thank you very much.
What a wonderful last word, and a very warm invitation to all of us. Of course, you have no idea how many people are actually listening and watching, but I know that your house is a warm place and will welcome many. It is my pleasure and privilege to close tonight, and it has indeed been enlightening, fascinating, intriguing, informative on so many levels, and challenging too. And I want to thank all of our panelists for being with us and for being so open and prepared to take the questions, and to thank all of you who are watching and listening. I'd like to thank all of you for actually joining us. I hope you feel as I do, that was absolutely an hour and a half, which was very worthwhile for all of us in terms of, as I said right at the beginning, breaking down the idea that the Haredi community is some kind of monolithic group. Like the rest of the Jewish community, it is diverse, it is colourful, and has very many angles of which we can all get to appreciate. So with that, I wish you all a good evening, and I hope you all keep well and safe, and that we will see you at another podcast. Thank you.